today we're going to talk a little bit about what to do when your students score plateaus, right? Because I think this is relevant I mean, it's relevant for every student, but I think it's more relevant now to all the seniors than it is anybody else. So I kind of wanted to break down, excuse me. So I kind of wanted to break down how like the my process kind of works when I think about doing a test, just because like in my life, I've been asked to tutor tests that I've never taken before, right? Or things like that. And parents are like, "Oh, my kid really likes you, so can you help him with X, Y, and Z tests or what have you?" Right? So, whenever I'm met with a brand new test, I always kind of look for a couple of things. So the first thing is just how is the scoring done, right? And so when I look at the scoring, I'm always looking at it from the perspective of, how many are each questions worth the same? And if they are, that's good. And if they're not, then that's a whole nother kind of can of worms. For the purposes of the SATs and the ACT, they're all the questions are worth 1 point, so that's irrelevant for us here. Okay. Then the second thing is just how are there points deducted, right? So like what's how many points per question and how many points deducted for wrong questions. Okay. And for the SAT and the ACT, there is no deduction in points. Okay. So for the SAT and ACT, what we're really dealing with is just the number of raw points. Okay. Now, and then now the next question is just the raw score to the scaled score conversion. Okay. So what I mean by that is that because the tests are based off of a curve, right? So it's not like getting 80% of the questions right gives you an 80 percentile on the test. Although it is kind of close, but that's not necessarily a guarantee. Like getting 90% of the questions right doesn't guarantee a 90th percentile, right? That could actually be a lot higher and things like that, right? So because the questions they all have different varying levels of difficulty, and the curve is kind of different, you always have to take into consideration the raw score, which is the number of questions that you answer correctly, to the scale score conversion, which is it's kind of like the magic number that that gets spit out by the SATs or the ACTs. Okay. And so these are the two things that I look at, right? I try to figure out how to get the raw score, and then what kind of score does that lead to my to the score that I want. Okay. So let's take a look at it from the perspective of the ACT. Okay. So let me just pull up an ACT practice test. All right. So we're gonna take a look at for the ACT test E23, which is the December 2021 test. Okay. So if I scroll all the way down to the back, right? And this, if you ever do a TIR report or anything like that, the ACT will send you this the actual test booklet that was used that your student used for the test. And then on the back, it's going to give you the answer key as well. So like these are the answer keys, and then all this other stuff here, like the POW, the KLA, the CSE, those are all just kind of like their reporting categories. Not that important, especially if you're just kind of trying to figure things out. Okay. So these are all the correct answers, so you can use that to mark it up. And then here is the raw score slash scaled score converter. Okay, so this column gives you the raw score. So if I answered 67 questions correctly, then I would get a 33. That coincides with the 33 on the scaled score, right? If I answer, 21 questions correctly on the math, that would give me a 17 on the scaled score. Okay. So now that I know those numbers, right? So now the way to look at it is just where am I now? Okay. Right? So what score am I getting? Okay, so for example, I'll just use an example of like a typical student that we see, right? So for that student, for the ACT, that student, let's say, scores a 20. Okay, now mind you, like the national average is about 18 for the ACT. So 20 is kind of par for the course, right? And the national average, the 18 actually changes and it goes a little bit higher when you take into consideration all the students who are taking the ACT in order to go to college, as opposed to just taking the ACT because it's offered at their school, right? So a 20 is kind of the average, okay? So a student who's scoring a 20, if I go back into the into this to this chart, right? Let me just make sure that the chart shows up here. Okay, so if I look at this chart, so a student who's scoring a 20, so let's just say for argument's sake that the student is scoring 20 all across the board, right? So 20 on the English. So let me put that down. So English is 20. Math is 20. Reading is 20. And science is 20. Okay. So now if they're scoring a 20 on all across the board, then if I look at the charts now, so I go right down to 20. So for 20, that means I'm getting about 40 to 42 questions right on the English section. Okay. Let me just kind of zoom things in so that I can move things around. Okay. So a score of 20 means that I'm getting about 40 to 42 questions right on the English section. Okay. And then for math, a score of 20 means that I'm getting about 27 to 28 questions right. And then for reading, I'm looking at a score of 20 gives me a 21 to 22. And then for science, that means I'm getting about 19 to 20 questions right. Okay, cool. So now that I know the number of questions that I am answering correctly, now I have to look at the entire test and see where am I giving up my points, right? So for example, for English, right, there are 75 questions in total. So this student is giving up roughly 35 points, okay? So now on the English section of the test, if you go back to the English section, if you scroll all the way to the top, right? So for example, on the English section, there are ideally essentially just two different types of questions on the English section. Okay, so there's what we call editorial questions, or these are questions that deal with more of like the style or like the clarity or the structure of things. And then there's grammar questions, right? And grammar questions are like, for example, question number one, sound, comma, to create, sound to create, comma, sound to create nothing, right? So these are all just testing you on the actual punctuation and the actual grammar rules, right? And so I would take a look and just say, okay, which one am I better at? Right? Do I do better with grammar-based questions, or do I do better with editorial questions? Like question number 5, which choice provides the most effective transitions from the first two sentences of the paragraph to the rest of the paragraph? That's a hard question, or a harder question than a grammar question, just because you have to have an idea of the entire passage as a whole, right? And then the fact that they make you do that after, relatively early in the passage is kind of a trap for you, because you think by the time you get through question number 5, you've been focusing more on the grammar, so you're not really focusing on the content. So like there's a lot of things that kind of trip you up, right? So then one of the things that I would look at is, am I better with grammar-based questions, or am I better with editorial questions, right? Odds are you're going to be better with grammar-based questions. So then let's do this. Why don't we just do the grammar-based questions first, right? So skip all the editorial questions and do them after you're done with all the grammar-based questions for that passage, okay? And let me show you what I mean. So for each reading English passage, you have 15 questions. So question number 1 is a grammar question, 2 is a grammar question, 3 is a grammar question, 4 is a grammar question. So I'm going to do questions 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to skip number 5, do 6, 7, skip number 8, skip number 9, 10, 11, and then 13, 14, and skip 12 and 15. Okay. And so I'm going to do all those questions first. And then when I'm done, I'm going to go back to the editorial questions and then actually do the necessary reading and the research in order to be able to answer that question. Okay. The other thing is that if you're scoring a 20 on the English section and you want to break that out, right? So let's say you want to get to you want to improve your score to, like, let's say a 30. Well, it's kind of silly to think you're going to go from 20 to 30 right away, right? But let's move things up incrementally. Now let's say that your first goal is going to be getting a 22. Okay, so to get a 22 on the English section, you really just need to answer for six more points. Okay, that's it. 6 more questions right. Okay, so then you have to start looking at it as, where can I get those 6 points from? Okay, so then like I said, just the fact that you're spending more time, or you're skipping all the editorial questions until the end, that might actually open up a lot more questions for you. Okay, and so like you have to start thinking about where to get the points from. In general, like if you're trying to get a 22, to be very honest, I would recommend just doing all the editorial questions and not even looking at, all the grammar questions and not even looking at the editorial questions, because the grammar questions enough by themselves are going to get you about 46 to 48 questions right, maybe a little bit more. Okay, so like if you're great at grammar questions, then just do those and then pick a letter of the day for all the editorial questions, right? So like you have to not think of this as like, I have to start the questions from question number 1 and then stop at question number 75. And you have to think of it in terms of, this is the number of points that I need to get to move my number up now, right? So then what can I do to move that number up? Okay, for math, right? So for a student scoring a 20 in the math, that means that they're getting 27 to 28 questions right. So roughly half of the tests, they're getting it right, and then the other half, they're not getting it right. Okay, so then start looking at where in that section are you getting the questions wrong. Ooh, sorry, that was not intended. So what I mean by that is, if I look at the maths answer key, right? So there's 1 through 60. So where are the question wrongs happening, right? So in general, the questions go from easy to medium to hard. So 1 through 20 are easy, 21 through 40 are medium, 41 through 60 are hard. Okay. And I can't stress this enough. They're not hard because the content is hard. They're hard because statistically more students are have been found to get those questions wrong when they test those questions out. Okay. So then the way that you have to look at it is that if I'm getting a lot of questions wrong within the first 40, I need to stop that right away. Right. Like that's got to be my first goal. Okay. So like on these exams, you have to start thinking of like, okay, let me go over the first 40, let me figure out what I don't know, let me figure out what I don't understand. Because just getting through that first 40, like let's say if you get through the first 40, you only get 2 questions wrong, that's a raw score of a 38. That would actually put you at a 25, right? Boom, you move from a 20 to a 25 pretty quickly. Okay. And you only do that by doing maybe, 2/3 of the test, right? So now you have to, like once again, the principle here is just trying to find how to get the number of points that you need. Okay. Because at the end of the day, colleges don't care that you finished the test or you didn't. Colleges don't care that you picked, B for the remaining answer choices, right? They only care about the number that you actually get. And that's the job that you have, is to get that number. Okay. And it's very important to keep that in mind, because if you once you know I need this many questions correct, then that's the goal that you should have. Okay. The other thing is that you can't jump from a 20 to a 30 right away. You just can't. I think that if you set that stuff up, you're going to set yourself up for failure, right? Because that's a very big jump from a 20 on the math section. That means you're getting 27 to 28 questions right, to a 30. That means you're getting 49 to 50 questions right. Okay. That is a huge jump. So we have to work on it incrementally, right? And so like if you want to work on it incrementally, like I would do with English and math, and I generally for the ACT, I kind of tie those two together because English and math are both rule-based content. So like grammar there's a rule for every punctuation on in English, right? And math, there's a function, there's an equation, there's something. So it's very kind of like the content, you could probably get around the question. So for English and math, I would look at the question types that I get wrong and then just kind of list them all out and then start learning those things and then just kind of pound through them, to start going through them. Okay. The other recommendation that I would have, as far as like English and math questions are concerned, and what we've been doing in our program that's actually worked very well. So like, for example, in this entire year, I think we saw almost 100 ACT students. Only 2 of them are going through our refresher program right now. Okay. And for everybody else, like they're very, very, very happy with their score. Okay. So like it's once you have like the idea of what kind of what content area you need help with, then we're gonna have you do. I would recommend that you do what's called progressive questioning. So, for example, if you realize that like, oh, I'm bad at averages and I'm bad at functions, right? Great. Go to Khan Academy or whatever, or take one of our classes. We'll teach you the concept pretty, from its very simple basis. Then we're going to give you medium level, easy questions. So questions that you would normally see within 1 through 20. And then we give you medium level questions. So the same question types that you would see between 21 through 40. And then we give you hard level questions that you would see from 41 through 60. And so as you progress through the level of difficulty, you still remember, oh, this is still just about averages. And averages is simply just adding all the parts together and then dividing it by the total number of things. So once you know that, and you just keep applying it over and over again, right? So you look at a harder question, you're like, it's hard, but I know I'm dealing with averages because it's using these words in the question. And so I just have to get what they're giving me to look like what I need, right? And then so from there, it becomes a lot easier, okay? And the same thing with grammar. For grammar, one, you got to know the rules, right? And if you're not sure if your student knows the rules for grammar, ask them what the 4 reasons for using a comma are, right? If one of their answers is to use it for a pause in the sentence, they don't know when to use a comma, okay? The 4 reasons are one is to just separate a describing phrase from the main sentence. Walking into the room, comma, Patrick waved hi. Second reason is to separate two complete sentences using comma plus one of the fanboys. Third reason is every item on the list. And the fourth reason is to surround unnecessary information. Okay. But like I said, grammar has rules for everything. So, learn the rules for the grammar and then go through when you're taking the test, go through the answer choices and make sure you identify the change in the grammar and then figure out whether that's correct or incorrect based on your knowledge of the rules. And if it's not, cross it off. And if it is, then keep it. Right. So that's, kind of a very abridged way of looking at it. Okay. As far as like reading is concerned, so I think a lot of people kind of look at a lot of people like my head tutor and I, Christina, she and I talked about this the other day as well. It's just kind of like it's one of those things where I think a lot of people feel like if you didn't work on reading when you were younger, it's going to be really hard to improve on now. And to a large extent, I agree, right? Like if your vocabulary is not that great right now, there's not much that you're going to be able to do in the next month to improve your vocabulary. There's a lot you can do within a year, as time goes by. But within a couple of weeks, you're really just going to be memorizing a lot of words. And then what ends up happening is you forget a lot of those words when it comes time to the test because you're just not used to using them, right? And I think one of the earmarks of like someone with a great vocabulary isn't the fact that they know the definition of the words verbatim. It's just that they know what the words mean, but they don't necessarily, can't explain it to you like in a very dictionary type of way. But when it comes to reading, right? So in order to do better, you have to stop doing what you normally do. Okay. And so, one thing that I noticed with the reading is that, I talk to students, they'll tell me that they read the whole passage and then they go to the questions, right? Or they'll tell me they read the questions and then they read the passage. And while they're reading the passage, they're trying to remember the questions and also trying to find the answer to the questions that they remember, which I don't think is necessarily a good idea. I saw some guy on Instagram saying like, oh, what I noticed is that most of the questions can be answered by the first paragraph or the last paragraph in the passage. So that's what you'd read whatever it is. I definitely don't agree with a lot of these things. If you're not going to use us, that's fine. But remember that like whatever way, that whichever company you do use, you have to practice it. You have to stick to it. You have to push back if you don't think it's working, what have you, right? But one thing that I would recommend is the first thing is always to read the blurb, and that's this little piece right here. Okay. And that's a very important first step because I need students to take action right away. As soon as they flip the page, I need them to do something. And reading the blurb is the easiest thing that they can do. Every passage has one. It's just what the first place that their eye is drawn to, they do it. And if they give you a lot of good information, great. If they don't give you a lot of information, you didn't waste a lot of time, but it got you started. Okay. Then the next thing you do is you can go to the first question with the line number, right? So for example, question number 12 has a line number. Question number 14 has a line number. Let's see, question number 18 has a line number, right? Question, yep, that's it. So, wait, where's 11? Yeah, so 11 doesn't have a line number. Let me just make sure. Yeah. So for this one passage, I have 12, 14, and 18. So I have 3 questions out of 10 that have line numbers in them. Okay. And so for example, like question number 12 says lines 12 to 25. So if you look at lines 12 to 25, that's this paragraph right here. Great. Read the paragraph, right? Read the paragraph, paraphrase what you've read in your own words, and then when you're going through the answer choices, cross off the specific word or phrase in each answer choice that makes it wrong. Those are the key fundamentals to it all. Without doing this, your accuracy will not improve because without doing this, you're going to be just kind of going by what feels good or what sounds good or or what have you, right? Whereas if you cross off the specific word or phrase, if you get that question wrong, you now create yourself an actionable plan to fix that because you can look at the answer choice and say, okay, why did I not like the right answer? Right? You can look at the word or phrase and say, okay, so I didn't understand what this word meant or something. Okay. So if you do this, so first thing is you do all the line number questions, right? So you do questions 12 to 20, you do question number 12, question number 14. By the way, 12 and 14 are in the same, same group, right? Because 12 is 12 to 20, question number 12 is lines 12 to 25. Question number 14 is line 21. Boom. So you kind of kill 2 birds with one stone, right? And then question number 18 is line 38. Now remember, when you're doing this, you don't want to read just that line. You want to read a few lines above and a few lines below. Because the way that I'm teaching the reading, it isn't about reading as little as possible and trying to get away with it. It's about reading as effectively as possible because your job as a test taker is to spend your time effectively answering a question, which is why I'm not a big fan of you reading the whole passage before you start because you haven't answered, you're not using that time to answer any question. Okay. So in this particular example, so if it says lines 38, so because line 38 is right here and it's a short paragraph, I'm probably just going to start from the paragraph on top. So like from up here and maybe read down to there. Okay, just because it's a short paragraph, I might need more context. But thankfully, I already read the second paragraph as well. Right. So I read the second paragraph and now I'm reading all this part right here. Okay. And so when you do the line number questions first, what you're going to find is you're going to have read about 50 to 60% of the passage kind of at face value, right off the bat. Okay. But you're now reading them to answer questions as opposed to just reading them for the sake of reading them. Okay. So now you have a pretty decent of idea of what's going on. Okay. Now the other thing is that, like for example, question number 16 has the word Danzig, right? Criticizes the ancient Greeks. Okay. Let's see. Question number 19 has the phrase U.S. Library of Congress, right? So like now the next type of question that I'm going to do are going to be questions that deal with specific words, keywords and phrases, right? So like if I look at the passage, I'm going to look for Danzig, right? And Danzig is kind of everywhere, so maybe that's not necessarily a good idea, but it does say Danzig criticizes. Yeah, so we're looking for like where they criticize the Greeks, right? Okay, so that might actually be in the first part, first paragraph. Okay, the U.S. Library of Congress is another one. So then we just have to go and look for the U.S. Library of Congress right here, right there. Okay, right. So then the answer to that question is going to be in that paragraph. Okay, and so same thing. Read it, paraphrase what you read, go through the answer choices, and cross off the word or phrase that makes the answer choice wrong. Like question number 20 talks about Kaplan's research, right? So we just have to find Kaplan right here. Kaplan argues, Kaplan traces, right? So let's see, I don't see Kaplan anywhere. Oh, Kaplan writes. So I think the first half is, it looks like the first half is about Danzig, the second half is about Kaplan. I'm just taking kind of a guess, right? And so like you're spending your time answering questions and not spending your time reading something. The other thing is that when you read the passage, you're taking a risk. You're risking that you understand what the passage is saying and that you have a very good understanding, like a memory of what's going on. But if you read the passage and you have no idea what's going on, you've just wasted 8 minutes doing something that didn't help you. Okay. All right. Real quick on the science section. So the way like science section is extremely intimidating for a lot of students, and it's actually the reason why most students choose not to take the ACT over the SAT, which is also the reason why the SAT is generally just more popular. And they're for 2025, they're actually making the science section optional, although I do recommend still signing up for the science section because we just don't know how the scores are going to play out and what schools prefer and things like that. I don't even think the schools are going to know until after they have some data, right? So I would say, if possible, just always do that. But I always tell students that on the science section, nobody knows all the science on the science section, and that's because these science passages are not based off of like scientific theories and things that you learn in school. A lot of them are based off of experiments. Okay, so like for example, if I look here, table 1 and table 2, right? So like I know that that this person did something, and these are the data that person got, right? So for example, sodium chloride, which is that formula, theoretical I value is 2. I have no idea what theoretical I value is, right? Potassium chloride, magnesium, and all that. And I noticed that sodium chloride and potassium chloride have 2, or their theoretical I values are 2. Magnesium chloride and ammonium sulfate they have the value of 3. Now, table number 2, concentration of aqueous solution, right? So that just means concentration of water, I think, right? And so like at point 1, the I value at 25 degrees for NaCl was 0.87, right? And so like when I start looking at the number of like as the number of moles per kilogram of water go up, so 0.1 to 2, the observed value for I goes up from 1.87 to 1.97, right? And I also noticed that there for NaCl, there's like a funky dip and then it goes right back up, right? So we go 185, 187, 185, 4, 4, 4, 5, 6, and it goes right back up to 187, then to 197, right? And these are all just kind of data that you should probably pay attention to, right? And then so for like it becomes like like question number based on table 2, what is the observed I value for a 0.6 mole of H2 solution of this, right? So we just got to go to table number 2 right there, and we're looking for NH4SO2 NH42SO2, so that's here, and then we're looking for 0.6 mole, so 0.6, so it's 2. So that's my answer, B, right? And I haven't read the passage. Okay, so for you treat the reading and the science kind of the same, meaning that for the science section, you take the information that they give you, right? So you look at the tables, and when I say look at the tables, try to look at it the way that I just did, right? A lot of students they'll look at it and go, okay, cool, it's there. I can always refer back to it, whatever. But for me, I'm always looking at it like, okay, so what are the values? What's going up? What's going down? Is it is there a steady increase, a steady decrease? Is it all over the place? I just like to squeeze as much juice out of this as I possibly can. Then I go to the first question, which refers me to a specific table. So like question number 1 tells me about table 2. Question number 2 tells me about table 2. 3 tells me about table 2. I would come back to 4 because it's asking me about 1 and 2. And maybe 5. Like, yeah, I would do 5, 4, 5, and 6 last, but they're also the last questions there anyway. Right. And so by the time I'm done with questions 1, 2, and 3, I should be pretty familiar with what the passage is talking about without having to read the part, right? And what I mean by reading is just this whole chunk right here. Now, I'm not saying don't read or try hard not to read. I'm saying answer as many questions as you can without having to read, and then only read if you absolutely need to. Okay, great. So, just to kind of recap, because I'm kind of all over the place with this, because I just got it from one meeting to another meeting, and I do apologize for that. I'll try to do a better job next time. But if your score is plateauing and you want to improve your score, you first need to know how the scores are derived, right? Once you know how they're derived, then you have to figure out what your current your current score is, and then create incremental improvements, right? And so like and so like if you want to just go up by 2 more points, how many questions do you have to answer correctly? So then that's your goal. Then you look at the questions and try to figure out the best way to come up with, like if you're trying to get 30 questions right, figure out the best way to get 30 questions right. Like go over a practice test that you took and just say, okay, I needed 30 questions right. Okay, so do you look at all the questions that you already got right? Okay, great. Subtract that from that. Okay, I needed 8 more points. Where could I have gotten 8 more points? Well, this question I could have definitely done, but I was being a little careless. Okay, this question I could have definitely done. Oh, this question I can figure this one out. I just have to go back and review some of the formulas, right? So like you figure out which questions you could have gotten more points from, study those things, pick another section, practice test, and then see if you can actually get those numbers. Okay, but it's very important to know where you're starting from, create incremental improvement plans, so incremental number of questions correct, and just kind of move your way there. Okay. Uh, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to just leave a comment down below. And you guys all know how to reach me. So yeah, thank you very much. Have a good day.